I was drinking my morning coffee when I saw Patricia Henderson marching across my driveway in Bozeman, Montana, her face twisted into that expression I had come to know too well over the past 6 months. The snow was coming down hard, as it always did in late November, and I had just finished attaching my plow blade to my truck, ready to clear out my driveway and help a few of my elderly neighbors with theirs. But Patricia had other plans, apparently. "Mr. Coleman," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the howling wind, "that needs to come off immediately." I set down my coffee mug on the hood of my truck and turned to face her, already feeling my patience wearing thin. Patricia Henderson was the president of our HOA, the Ridgeview Estates Homeowners Association, and she had made it her personal mission to make my life miserable since I had moved into this neighborhood after my divorce last spring. I had bought this house with the settlement money, hoping for a fresh start, but instead, I had walked right into a nightmare. "What are you talking about, Patricia?" I asked, even though I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly what she was talking about. She pointed a gloved finger at my plow blade, her eyes narrowing behind her designer glasses. "That monstrosity attached to your vehicle. It is in direct violation of Section 12, Paragraph 8 of our HOA covenant, which explicitly states that no commercial equipment may be stored or displayed on residential property." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to process what she had just said. "It's a plow blade, Patricia, for clearing snow. You know, the stuff that's currently burying our entire neighborhood." "I am well aware of what snow is, Mr. Coleman," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "However, that does not change the fact that you are in violation of our community standards. The plow blade must be removed within 24 hours, or the HOA will be forced to take legal action." I let out a long breath, watching the vapor curl up into the cold air. "Let me get this straight. You want me to remove the plow blade from my truck, even though we are about to get hit with what the Weather Service is calling the worst snowstorm in a decade?" "The HOA covenant does not make exceptions for weather conditions," Patricia replied primly. "If you wish to clear your driveway, you may use a shovel like everyone else." I looked past her at the massive driveway that led to my 2-car garage, then at the street beyond, already covered in several inches of fresh powder. "Patricia, I have been using this plow to help Mrs. Chen and Mr. Rodriguez clear their driveways. They are both in their 80s. You expect them to shovel out after 2 feet of snow?" "That is not the HOA's concern," she said. "Our concern is maintaining property values and aesthetic standards. Your truck with that industrial equipment attached looks like it belongs in a construction zone, not a residential community." "It's a pickup truck with a plow blade," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Half the guys in Montana have one. It is not exactly unusual." Patricia's expression hardened. "Perhaps not in rural areas, Mr. Coleman, but Ridgeview Estates is a premier planned community, and we have standards to uphold. You have 24 hours to comply, or we will proceed with filing a formal complaint with the county. And I should inform you that continued violations can result in fines of up to $500 per day, with the possibility of criminal charges for contempt of HOA authority." I actually laughed at that. Criminal charges? For having a plow blade on my truck? "The law is quite clear about the enforcement powers granted to homeowners associations in Montana," Patricia said, her voice taking on a lecturing tone. "When you purchased your property, you signed a legally binding agreement to abide by all HOA rules and regulations. Failure to do so can result in various penalties, including but not limited to fines, liens against your property, and yes, in cases of willful and continued disregard for HOA authority, criminal charges." She pulled out a folded document from her expensive wool coat and handed it to me. I took it, my hands already cold from standing out in the snow, and unfolded it. It was a formal notice of violation, typed up on official-looking letterhead, citing the section of the covenant she had mentioned and demanding immediate compliance. "This is insane," I muttered, reading through the legalistic language. "This is the rule of law, Mr. Coleman," Patricia said. 24 hours. Good day." She turned on her heel and marched back toward her own house, 3 doors down from mine, leaving me standing in my driveway holding a violation notice while snow continued to pile up around me. I looked at my truck, at the plow blade I had spent good money on specifically so I could help out my neighbors during the brutal Montana winters, and felt a surge of anger that made my chest tight. I had dealt with Patricia's nonsense before. She had sent me a violation notice because my trash cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though I had just taken them out that morning and was planning to bring them back in after work. She had complained about the color of my front door, saying it was not an approved shade according to the HOA's strict color palette, even though it was the same color the previous owners had painted it. She had even tried to fine me because I had parked my work truck in my driveway overnight, claiming it violated the community's aesthetic standards, never mind that I needed it there because I had an early morning job the next day. But this was different. This was not about trash cans or paint colors or where I parked. This was about my ability to function during a Montana winter and about helping my neighbors who could not clear their own driveways. The thought of 80-year-old Mrs. Chen trying to shovel out after a major snowstorm made my blood boil. I went back inside my house, tracking snow across the mudroom floor, and called my buddy Derek, who worked as a contractor in town. He had been dealing with HOAs for years and had plenty of stories about their overreach. "Derek, I need some advice," I said when he picked up. "What did Patricia do now?" he asked, and I could hear the amusement in his voice. "She is threatening me with legal action if I do not remove my plow blade. Says it violates the HOA covenant." There was a pause on the other end. "You're kidding." I wish I was. She handed me a formal violation notice and everything. Says I could face criminal charges if I do not comply. Derek let out a low whistle. Man, that woman is something else. Look, I am not a lawyer, but I've had to deal with enough HOA crap to know that they usually have pretty broad authority when it comes to enforcing their rules. The question is whether that particular rule is actually enforceable. She cited Section 12, Paragraph 8, something about commercial equipment, I said, pulling out the notice to read it again. "Do you have a copy of your HOA covenant?" Derek asked. "Yeah, somewhere. They gave me a packet when I closed on the house, but I will be honest, I did not read every single page." "Nobody does, and that is how they get you," Derek said. "Find it and read that section carefully. Sometimes these things are worded vaguely enough that they can interpret them however they want, but sometimes they are specific enough that you can find loopholes. And if push comes to shove, you might want to talk to a lawyer." I thanked Derek and hung up, then spent the next 20 minutes digging through my filing cabinet until I found the thick binder containing all my closing documents. The HOA covenant was buried in the middle, a 40-page document written in dense legal language that made my eyes glaze over. But I forced myself to read through it until I found Section 12. The section was titled Prohibited Uses and Structures and covered everything from sheds to satellite dishes to boats. Paragraph 8 read, "No commercial vehicles, equipment, or machinery shall be stored, parked, or displayed on any residential lot in a manner visible from the street or neighboring properties. This includes but is not limited to construction equipment, commercial trucks over 1-ton capacity, industrial machinery, and business-related vehicles bearing commercial signage or markings." I read it 3 times, trying to figure out how Patricia was interpreting my plow blade as a violation. My truck was a standard half-ton pickup, not a commercial vehicle. The plow blade was not industrial machinery by any reasonable definition, and I was not running a commercial snow removal business. I was just helping out my neighbors. But I also knew that HOAs could be notoriously flexible in how they interpreted their own rules, especially when it was someone like Patricia doing the interpreting. She had made it clear from day one that she did not like me, though I had never figured out exactly why. Maybe it was because I had not immediately fallen in line with her vision for the neighborhood. Maybe it was because I had pushed back when she tried to fine me over the trash can incident. Or maybe she just enjoyed having power over people and I was an easy target. The snow was really coming down now, and I could see my neighbors starting to shovel their driveways. Old Mr. Rodriguez was out there with his ancient snowblower, the one that looked like it might give up the ghost any day now. Mrs. Chen's driveway was still untouched, and I knew she was probably inside, dreading the moment when she would have to bundle up and start the backbreaking work of clearing it out. I made a decision right then. I was not taking the plow blade off my truck. Patricia Henderson and her HOA could go pound sand. I had bought this equipment specifically to help my community during the harsh winters we got in Bozeman, and I was not going to let some power-hungry busybody stop me from doing the right thing. I pulled on my heavy coat, gloves, and boots, then headed back outside. I fired up my truck, feeling the engine rumble to life, and spent the next 3 hours clearing driveways. I did my own first, then headed over to Mrs. Chen's place. She came to the door as I was finishing up, her face breaking into a wide smile. "Oh, Jack, you are such a blessing," she called out over the sound of the wind. "I was just wondering how I was going to manage all this snow." "No problem, Mrs. Chen," I called back. "Just stay warm and let me know if you need anything else." I moved on to Mr. Rodriguez's driveway next, then helped out a young couple at the end of the street who both had to get to work early and did not have time to clear the heavy snow. By the time I was done, my arms were sore from controlling the truck through all the tight maneuvers, but I felt good. This was what neighbors were supposed to do for each other. When I got back to my house, there was another notice taped to my front door. I ripped it off and read it while still sitting in my truck. This one was even more formal than the first, stating that I had been observed using prohibited commercial equipment on HOA property, and that my violation had been documented with photographic evidence. It went on to say that if I did not immediately comply with the previous notice, the HOA would file a formal complaint with the Lewis and Clark County court system within 48 hours. I crumpled up the notice and tossed it on my passenger seat, too tired and annoyed to deal with it right then. I went inside, made myself dinner, and tried to forget about the whole situation. But as I was getting ready for bed that night, my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize, but I answered anyway. "Is this Jack Coleman?" a woman's voice asked. "Yeah, who is this?" "My name is Sharon Mitchell. I am the vice president of the Ridgeview Estates HOA board. I'm calling about the violation notices you received today." I sat down on my couch, suddenly very awake. "Let me guess, Patricia sent you to deliver more threats?" "Actually, I am calling to apologize," Sharon said, and I could hear genuine embarrassment in her voice. "I only found out about Patricia's actions this evening when another board member forwarded me the notices she sent. I want you to know that not all of us agree with her interpretation of the HOA covenant." That caught me off guard. "Really?" "Really," Sharon confirmed. "Several of us on the board think Patricia is overstepping her authority. The covenant language about commercial equipment was intended to prevent people from parking cement mixers or backhoes in their driveways, not to stop residents from having basic snow removal equipment. Half the board members have plow blades on their own trucks." "Then why is Patricia able to send me these notices?" I asked. Sharon sighed. "Because as HOA president, she has the authority to issue violation notices without board approval. We can overrule her decisions, but it requires a formal board meeting and a majority vote. I am working on scheduling an emergency meeting for this week, but in the meantime, I wanted you to know that you are not alone in this fight." "I appreciate that," I said, feeling some of the tension leave my shoulders. "So what should I do about her threat to file a court complaint?" "Honestly, I do not think she will actually follow through," Sharon said. "Patricia likes to make threats, but she knows that if she tries to take this to court, the rest of the board will oppose her and it will make the whole HOA look ridiculous. Just sit tight and wait for the board meeting. I will call you as soon as we have it scheduled." I thanked Sharon and hung up, feeling slightly better about the situation. But I also knew Patricia well enough to know that she did not make idle threats. If she said she was going to file a complaint, she probably meant it. The next morning, I woke up to find that the snowstorm had intensified overnight. There was easily 1.5 feet of new snow covering everything, and more was still coming down. The Weather Service had issued a winter storm warning, advising people to stay off the roads unless absolutely necessary. I called my boss and let him know I would be working from home, then settled in at my kitchen table with my laptop. Around 10 in the morning, there was a loud pounding on my front door. I opened it to find Patricia standing there, flanked by 2 people I did not recognize. One was a thin man in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit that looked completely inappropriate for a Montana snowstorm. The other was a woman about Patricia's age, wearing a matching wool coat and the same pinched expression. "Mr. Coleman, this is Richard Pemberton, our HOA attorney, and Diane Schwartz, the HOA secretary," Patricia announced. "We are here to conduct an inspection of your property." "An inspection?" I repeated, not moving from the doorway. "For what?" As per Section 23 of the HOA covenant, the board has the right to inspect any property within the community to ensure compliance with all rules and regulations, Richard said in a nasal voice. We have reason to believe you may be in violation of multiple sections of the covenant, and we need to document these violations for our court filing. I looked past them at my driveway, where my truck sat with the plow blade still attached. You cannot be serious. We are entirely serious, Mr. Coleman, Patricia said. Now, are you going to grant us access to inspect your property, or do we need to return with law enforcement? I wanted to tell them where they could shove their inspection, but I also knew that refusing would probably just make things worse. Fine, but you are not coming inside my house. You can inspect the exterior all you want. That will be sufficient, Richard said, pulling out a clipboard and digital camera. I stood on my front porch, arms crossed against the cold, watching as the three of them walked around my property. Richard took photos of my truck from multiple angles, focusing on the plow blade. Diane made notes on a tablet. Patricia just stood there with a triumphant expression on her face, like she had already won some great victory. After about 15 minutes, they returned to the front of my house. Richard pulled out a document and handed it to me. This is a formal notice of multiple violations. In addition to the commercial equipment violation we previously documented, we are also citing you for having a vehicle that exceeds the approved size specifications for driveways in Section 9, Paragraph 4, and for creating excessive noise during early morning hours, which violates our community quiet hours policy. I looked at the document in disbelief. My truck does not exceed any size specifications. It is a standard pickup. And what noise are you talking about? Your truck's diesel engine creates noise levels exceeding 70 decibels, which is above our permitted threshold of 60 decibels during quiet hours, which are defined as 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. and noon to 2 p.m., Diane said, reading from her tablet. I have not run my truck during any of those times, I protested. According to our records, you operated your vehicle at 6:45 a.m. yesterday morning, Patricia said smugly. That's a clear violation of quiet hours. 6:45 is not before 7, I said. Our quiet hours policy uses a 15-minute buffer period to account for noise that may disturb residents who are still sleeping, Richard explained. Therefore, the effective quiet hours are actually 9:45 p.m. to 7:15 a.m. This was absolutely insane. They were making up violations out of thin air, twisting their own rules to fit whatever narrative they wanted. I looked down at the document again and saw that they were now threatening fines totaling $1,500 if I did not immediately comply with all three violations. I am not paying a single cent of this, I said, handing the document back to Richard. These violations are complete garbage, and you know it. Richard's expression did not change. That is your prerogative, Mr. Coleman. However, I should inform you that the HOA will be filing a formal complaint with the Lewis and Clark County court system this afternoon, seeking an injunction to force your compliance with all HOA covenants, as well as reimbursement for all fines and legal fees associated with this matter. Additionally, due to your willful and continued disregard for HOA authority, we will be requesting that the court hold you in contempt, which can carry penalties, including jail time. That last part hit me like a punch to the gut. Jail time for having a plow blade on my truck? For contempt of court, should the judge grant our injunction and you continue to refuse compliance, Richard clarified. In Montana, contempt of HOA authority is treated similarly to contempt of court, and can result in fines or imprisonment at the judge's discretion. Patricia was practically glowing with satisfaction now. I did warn you, Mr. Coleman. You should have listened. They left after that, leaving me standing on my porch in the freezing cold, trying to process what had just happened. I immediately called Sharon Mitchell back and told her everything. "Oh my God, I cannot believe she actually went through with it," Sharon said, sounding genuinely shocked. "Jack, I am so sorry. This is completely out of control. Let me make some calls and see what I can do." Next, I called Derek again and filled him in. He was equally stunned. "Dude, you need to get a lawyer like yesterday," he said. "This is not some petty HOA squabble anymore. If they are actually filing court papers, you need professional help." I knew he was right, but the thought of hiring a lawyer made my stomach churn. I had just gone through an expensive divorce less than a year ago, and my savings were already depleted. But I also was not going to just roll over and let Patricia throw me in jail over a plow blade. I spent the rest of the day researching lawyers in Bozeman who dealt with HOA disputes. Most of them wanted retainers of several $1,000s just to take on the case. I finally found one, a guy named Tom Richardson, who had good reviews and offered a free initial consultation. I called his office and managed to get an appointment for the next afternoon. That evening, I was sitting in my living room trying to distract myself with a movie when there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Mrs. Chen standing there, holding a covered dish. "I brought you some dinner," she said, smiling warmly. "I heard about your trouble with Patricia and that awful HOA. I wanted to make sure you were eating properly." I felt a lump form in my throat at her kindness. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. That's really thoughtful." "What Patricia is doing is wrong," she continued, her expression growing serious. "You have been nothing but helpful to everyone in this neighborhood. She is just a bitter woman who enjoys making people miserable. Several of us are planning to attend the next HOA board meeting to speak on your behalf." "You do not have to do that," I said, not wanting to drag my neighbors into my mess. "We want to," Mrs. Chen insisted. "You helped us when we needed it. Now it is our turn to help you." After she left, I ate the homemade chicken soup she had brought, feeling grateful for neighbors like her but also anxious about what was coming. I barely slept that night, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. What if the judge actually sided with the HOA? What if I really did end up in jail over this? It seemed impossible, but I had learned not to underestimate Patricia's vindictiveness. The next afternoon, I drove through still snowy streets to Tom Richardson's office in downtown Bozeman. His office was in a converted historic building, small but professional-looking. Tom himself was in his early 40s, with a friendly demeanor that immediately put me at ease. I spent an hour telling him everything that had happened, showing him all the violation notices and the court filing documents that had been delivered to me that morning via certified mail. Tom listened carefully, taking notes and occasionally asking questions. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "Jack, I am going to be straight with you. This is one of the most ridiculous HOA cases I have ever seen, and I have seen some doozies. The good news is that I think we can fight this and win. The bad news is that it is going to cost you some money and time." "How much money are we talking about?" I asked, bracing myself. "My retainer for a case like this is typically $3,000, Tom said. "However, given the circumstances and the fact that this HOA is clearly abusing their authority, I am willing to take this on for $2,000. And if we win, which I believe we will, we can petition the court to make the HOA pay your legal fees." I did some quick mental math of my checking account balance and winced. $2,000 was a lot, but it was better than the alternative. "Okay, I can do that." "Great," Tom said, pulling out a contract. "Now, let me explain our strategy. The HOA is filing for an injunction, which means they want the court to order you to remove your plow blade and comply with their interpretation of the covenant. They are also seeking contempt charges, which is frankly absurd, but we will need to address that too. Our defense is going to focus on 3 main points." He held up a finger. "First, we are going to argue that their interpretation of the commercial equipment clause is overly broad and unreasonable. A plow blade on a personal vehicle is not commercial equipment by any standard definition." He held up a second finger. "Second, we are going to argue that their enforcement is selective and discriminatory. If other residents have plow blades or similar equipment and are not being cited, that shows the HOA is targeting you specifically." He held up a third finger. "Third, we are going to argue that their additional violations regarding vehicle size and noise are either factually incorrect or based on rules that are not actually in the HOA covenant. We will force them to prove every single claim they are making." "What about the jail time threat?" I asked. Tom smiled. "That is just them trying to scare you. Contempt charges for HOA violations are extremely rare, and when they do happen, it is usually in cases involving significant financial fraud or property damage. No judge in Montana is going to send someone to jail for having a plow blade on their truck. Trust me on that." I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. So what happens next? Next, we file our response to their complaint, which I will have ready by tomorrow. Then we wait for the court to schedule a hearing. Given that they are seeking an injunction, which is considered an emergency measure, the hearing will probably be scheduled within a week or two. In the meantime, do not remove your plow blade, do not pay any of their fines, and do not engage with Patricia or anyone else from the HOA board, except through me. I left Tom's office feeling better than I had in days. I still had a legal battle ahead of me, but at least I had someone competent in my corner. I stopped by the bank on the way home and withdrew the money for Tom's retainer, then dropped it off at his office first thing the next morning. Over the next week, the situation in the neighborhood got progressively weirder. Patricia started having someone park across the street from my house, just sitting in a car watching. I assumed they were documenting my every move, looking for more violations to add to their list. My neighbors noticed too, and more than one of them came by to express their support and outrage at what was happening. Mr. Rodriguez told me that Patricia had also started harassing him about his old snowblower, claiming it was an eyesore and needed to be stored inside his garage instead of on his side porch. Another neighbor, a woman named Lisa who lived 2 streets over, said Patricia had cited her for having a wreath on her door that was not an approved holiday decoration according to HOA standards, even though it was a simple evergreen wreath with a red bow. It became clear that Patricia was not just targeting me. She was on some kind of power trip, using her position as HOA president to bully anyone who did not fall in line with her vision of what the neighborhood should be. The more I learned about her behavior, the angrier I got. Sharon Mitchell called me a few days later with an update. "We finally got the emergency board meeting scheduled for next week," she said. "But Jack, I have to warn you, Patricia is fighting us on everything. She is claiming that your violations are so serious that they warrant immediate action, and she is refusing to back down." "What about the other board members?" I asked. "It is split right now," Sharon admitted. "There are 7 people on the board. 3 of us are definitely on your side, 3 are siding with Patricia, and 1 is undecided. We need that 4th vote to overrule her." "Who is the undecided one?" "His name is Greg Williamson. He's a newer board member, only been on for about 6 months. He tends to go along with whoever makes the strongest argument. If you can talk to him before the meeting, it might help." She gave me Greg's contact information, and I called him that evening. Greg was polite but non-committal when I explained my side of the story. He said he wanted to wait until the board meeting to hear all the evidence before making a decision. I could not really argue with that, even though I desperately wanted him to commit to voting in my favor. The court hearing was scheduled for a Monday morning, 2 weeks after Patricia's attorney had filed the original complaint. Tom Richardson called me the Friday before to go over our strategy one more time. "I want you to be prepared for the HOA to throw everything they can at you," Tom said. "They are going to make you sound like some kind of neighborhood menace. Just stay calm, tell the truth, and let me handle the legal arguments." "What are our chances?" I asked. "Honestly, I would say 80% in our favor," Tom replied. "The law is on our side, and their case is based on a ridiculous interpretation of their own rules. But you never know with judges. Some of them tend to side with HOAs by default because they view them as legitimate authorities. We just need to make sure the judge understands how unreasonable their demands are." That weekend was brutal. I could barely eat or sleep, my mind constantly running through different scenarios. I kept imagining the judge siding with Patricia, ordering me to remove my plow blade, fining me thousands of dollars. The jail time threat still hung over me too, even though Tom had assured me it was not realistic. Sunday evening, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a man's voice said, "Is this Jack Coleman?" "Yeah, who is this?" "My name is Detective Mark Reynolds with the Lewis and Clark County Sheriff's Office. I'm calling about a complaint we received from your HOA." My blood ran cold. "What kind of complaint?" "According to the complaint, you've been operating commercial equipment without proper permits and have been trespassing on private property belonging to the HOA. I need to ask you some questions about these allegations." I could not believe this was happening. Patricia had actually called the police. "Detective, I think there has been a misunderstanding. I have a plow blade on my truck that I use to clear driveways in my neighborhood. The HOA claims it violates their covenant, but it is not illegal." Well, that is what I am trying to determine, Detective Reynolds said. The complaint also mentions that you have been using this equipment on common areas maintained by the HOA, which could constitute trespassing or vandalism if you did not have permission. I have only cleared private driveways, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I have never touched any HOA common areas. Okay, well, I am going to need to take a formal statement from you. Can you come down to the sheriff's office tomorrow morning, say around 9? I closed my eyes, feeling the walls closing in. I have a court hearing at 10. Can we do it after that? There was a pause. A court hearing about this HOA matter? Yes, sir. All right. Let me see what the complaint says. I could hear papers rustling on his end. You know what, Mr. Coleman, I am looking at this complaint more carefully, and I think this is really a civil matter, not a criminal one. I am going to hold off on taking any action until after your court hearing. If the judge determines you have been violating HOA rules, then we can discuss whether any criminal charges are warranted. But right now, this just sounds like an HOA dispute. Thank you, Detective, I said, relief flooding through me. Just keep your nose clean and let the courts sort this out, he said, and hung up. I immediately called Tom and told him about the call. He let out a string of curse words that would have made a sailor blush. They are trying to intimidate you, Tom said once he had calmed down. This is actually good for us, though. It shows the judge just how far the HOA is willing to go to harass you. I'm going to mention this in court tomorrow. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. I put on my best suit, the one I had bought for my wedding years ago and had worn to my divorce hearing. It felt both appropriate and depressing to wear it to another legal proceeding. The Lewis and Clark County Courthouse was an imposing brick building in downtown Helena, about an hour drive from Bozeman. I met Tom in the lobby at 9:30, and we went over our arguments one more time before heading up to the courtroom. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, with wooden benches and a raised judge's bench at the front. Patricia was already there with Richard Pemberton and another man I did not recognize, who Tom said was probably a second attorney. Diane Schwartz was there too, along with two other people from the HOA board that I had never met. We took our seats on the opposite side of the courtroom, and I tried not to look at Patricia. I could feel her staring at me, probably imagining me being led away in handcuffs. At exactly 10 o'clock, the bailiff called out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Martha Campbell." Judge Campbell was a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She had a stern expression as she took her seat and looked over the papers in front of her. "This is case number 26-1234, Ridgeview Estates Homeowners Association versus Jack Coleman," she said. "I have reviewed the complaint and the response. This is a hearing on the HOA's motion for a preliminary injunction. Mr. Pemberton, you may proceed." Richard Pemberton stood up and launched into his opening argument. He painted a picture of me as a reckless neighbor who had repeatedly violated HOA rules, showing no regard for community standards or the property values of my neighbors. He pulled up photos of my truck with the plow blade, pointing out how it looked industrial and out of place in a residential setting. "Your Honor, the HOA covenant is clear," Pemberton said. "No commercial equipment may be displayed on residential property. Mr. Coleman's plow blade is commercial equipment by any reasonable definition. He has used it to perform snow removal services, which is a commercial activity. He has refused repeated requests to comply with the covenant, and his continued defiance threatens the integrity of the entire HOA enforcement system. If residents can simply ignore the rules they find inconvenient, then the whole purpose of having an HOA is undermined." He went on for about 15 minutes, citing various Montana laws about HOA enforcement powers and property rights. Then he got to the contempt request. "Furthermore, Your Honor, Mr. Coleman's willful disregard for lawful authority rises to the level of contempt. The HOA has made good faith efforts to work with him, offering multiple opportunities for compliance. Instead, he has responded with hostility and defiance. We ask that the court not only grant the injunction requiring immediate removal of the equipment, but also hold Mr. Coleman in contempt and impose appropriate sanctions, which may include fines or incarceration, until he agrees to comply." I felt my face go hot when he said the word incarceration. Tom put a hand on my arm, a silent reminder to stay calm. When Pemberton sat down, Judge Campbell turned to Tom. "Mr. Richardson, your response?" Tom stood up, and I could see he was completely relaxed, almost casual. "Your Honor, this is one of the most overreaching HOA actions I have encountered in my career. Let me address the commercial equipment claim first. Mr. Coleman owns a personal truck, a standard half-ton pickup that is registered for personal use. He attached a plow blade to it for the purpose of clearing his own driveway and helping elderly neighbors with theirs during Montana winters. There's nothing commercial about that. He is not running a snow removal business. He's not charging anyone for this service. He's simply being a good neighbor." Tom pulled out a copy of the HOA covenant and held it up. The covenant language that the HOA is relying on was clearly intended to prevent residents from storing cement mixers, backhoes, dump trucks, and other actual commercial equipment. A plow blade on a personal vehicle does not fit that description. In fact, if we follow the HOA's interpretation to its logical conclusion, then anyone with a truck bed trailer, a boat hitch, or a bicycle rack could be cited for commercial equipment violations. It is an absurd overreach. Judge Campbell was listening intently, occasionally glancing at the documents in front of her. "Second, Your Honor, the HOA's enforcement is selective and discriminatory. We have documentation showing that at least 4 other residents in Ridgeview Estates have plow blades or similar equipment on their vehicles, yet none of them have been cited. The only difference is that Mr. Coleman pushed back against previous frivolous violations, and now the HOA president has made it her personal mission to drive him out of the neighborhood." "Do you have evidence of these other residents?" Judge Campbell asked. "Yes, Your Honor." Tom handed a folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. "Those are photographs taken last week showing other vehicles in the neighborhood with snow removal equipment. We also have affidavits from 3 residents stating that they have never been contacted by the HOA about their equipment." Judge Campbell looked through the photographs, her expression unreadable. "Third, Your Honor, the additional violations cited by the HOA are either false or based on rules that do not actually exist in the covenant. The vehicle size claim is demonstrably wrong. Mr. Coleman's truck is well within standard dimensions. The noise violation is based on a buffer period that is mentioned nowhere in the HOA covenant. They are making up rules as they go along to justify their harassment." Tom paused, then his voice took on a harder edge. "And finally, Your Honor, regarding the contempt request, the HOA is asking you to jail a man for having a plow blade on his truck, not for destroying property, not for threatening anyone, for having snow removal equipment during a Montana winter. This is not contempt, Your Honor. This is vindictive abuse of the legal system. In fact, just last night, Mr. Coleman received a call from a sheriff's detective because the HOA filed a criminal complaint against him, trying to intimidate him before this hearing." Judge Campbell's eyes narrowed at that. "Is that true, Mr. Pemberton?" Pemberton stood up, looking uncomfortable for the first time. "Your Honor, the HOA has a duty to report potential criminal activity. We believed Mr. Coleman's actions might constitute trespassing on HOA-maintained property." "Did your client actually witness him trespassing on HOA property?" Judge Campbell asked. "We have reports from residents that he was seen operating his vehicle in areas that may include HOA-maintained streets," Pemberton said carefully. "May include," Judge Campbell repeated. "Mr. Pemberton, making false criminal complaints is itself a crime. You better hope your client has solid evidence to back up that report." Pemberton sat down quickly, and I could see Patricia's face had gone red. Judge Campbell looked down at her papers for a long moment, then back up at both attorneys. "I'm going to make this very simple. The HOA's interpretation of their commercial equipment clause is unreasonable and overbroad. A plow blade on a personal vehicle used for personal purposes is not commercial equipment. The evidence of selective enforcement is concerning and suggests that this action is motivated by personal animus rather than legitimate community concerns. And the contempt request is frankly offensive. This court will not be used as a tool for HOA presidents to settle personal grudges." She looked directly at Patricia now. "Ms. Henderson, I'm denying your motion for an injunction in its entirety. Mr. Coleman is free to keep his plow blade on his truck. Furthermore, I am ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Coleman's reasonable attorney fees in defending this frivolous action. You have wasted this court's time and taxpayer resources on what should have been resolved through common sense and neighborly communication. I felt like I could not breathe. Tom was right. The judge had thrown out their case in minutes, but Judge Campbell was not done. Additionally, I am going to send a copy of this proceeding to the Montana Attorney General's office with a recommendation that they investigate the Ridgeview Estates HOA for potential violations of state consumer protection laws. HOAs have legitimate purposes, but they do not have unlimited authority to harass homeowners over trivial matters. She banged her gavel. This hearing is concluded. Mr. Coleman, you are free to go. The courtroom erupted in noise as everyone started talking at once. Tom turned to me with a huge grin. I told you we would win. I shook his hand, too overwhelmed to speak. Behind us, I could hear Patricia arguing loudly with her attorneys, her voice shrill and angry. Diane Schwartz was trying to calm her down, but Patricia was having none of it. As we gathered our things to leave, Patricia suddenly broke away from her group and marched over to us. This is not over, Mr. Coleman, not by a long shot. Judge Campbell, who had not yet left the bench, called out sharply, Ms. Henderson, you will not threaten parties in my courtroom. If you continue this behavior, I will hold you in contempt. Do I make myself clear? Patricia's mouth snapped shut. She glared at me one more time, then turned and stalked out of the courtroom, her entourage hurrying after her. Tom and I left the courthouse and stood on the front steps, breathing in the cold morning air. What happens now? I asked. Now you go home and put your legal troubles behind you, Tom said. The judge ordered them to pay your fees, so I will submit my bill to their attorney. And with any luck, the Attorney General investigation will put some serious pressure on them to reform their practices. What about Patricia? Can she still cause problems for me? Tom shrugged. She could try, but after this ruling, any future violations she tries to enforce against you will be viewed with extreme skepticism. My advice is to document everything, keep records of any communication with the HOA, and call me immediately if she tries anything else. I drove back to Bozeman, feeling like a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. When I got home, Mrs. Chen and Mr. Rodriguez were waiting in my driveway. Mrs. Chen had tears in her eyes. We heard what happened, she said, hugging me tightly. The whole neighborhood is talking about it. You stood up to that horrible woman and won. Mr. Rodriguez shook my hand vigorously. You are a hero, Jack. Someone needed to put Patricia in her place. That evening, my phone did not stop ringing. Neighbors I barely knew were calling to congratulate me. Lisa, the woman who had been cited for her wreath, called to say she was fighting her violation now, using my case as precedent. Another neighbor said 3 other people were also planning to challenge their violations. The next day, I got a call from Sharon Mitchell. Jack, I wanted to let you know that we had our emergency board meeting last night. It got pretty heated, but we voted to remove Patricia as HOA president. She resigned from the board entirely after the vote. Seriously? I said, hardly believing it. Seriously, the board members who supported her realized that she had made the whole HOA look terrible, and they turned on her pretty quickly once it became clear that the Attorney General might get involved. We elected a new president last night, a guy named Michael Torres. He is a lot more reasonable than Patricia ever was. That is great news, I said. There is more, Sharon continued. We also voted to revise the HOA covenant to clarify the commercial equipment clause and remove some of the more vague language that Patricia was exploiting. And we are implementing new oversight procedures so that no single board member can issue violations without review. It felt like justice had actually been served. The bully had been defeated, the system had worked, and things were going to get better. But I was not prepared for what happened 3 weeks later. I was home on a Saturday afternoon watching a football game when there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Detective Reynolds, the sheriff's detective who had called me before the court hearing. Mr. Coleman, I am sorry to bother you, he said, but I need to ask you some questions about Patricia Henderson. What about her? I asked, suddenly wary. When did you last have contact with her? At the court hearing a few weeks ago. Why? Detective Reynolds looked uncomfortable. I probably should not be telling you this, but given your history with her, I thought you should know. We arrested Patricia Henderson yesterday on charges of embezzlement and fraud. I stared at him, trying to process that information. What? After the judge referred the HOA to the Attorney General's office, they launched an investigation. Turns out Patricia has been stealing money from the HOA accounts for over 2 years. We are talking about almost $100,000. She was using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, vacations, home renovations, you name it. I felt my jaw drop. Oh my God. The AG's office brought us in once they realized the scope of the fraud. Detective Reynolds continued. We executed a search warrant on her house yesterday and found extensive documentation of the theft. She has been charged with multiple felonies. She is looking at serious prison time. I cannot believe it, I said, though part of me absolutely could believe it. Patricia's obsessive need for control, her expensive clothes, her vindictiveness toward anyone who questioned her authority, it all made sense now. She had been running the HOA like her personal piggy bank, and anyone who threatened to expose her had to be crushed. We are going to need to interview everyone who had dealings with her, Detective Reynolds said. I know you had that court case, so I wanted to give you a heads up. Someone from the AG's office will probably contact you in the next few days. Sure enough, 2 days later, I got a call from an investigator with the Montana Attorney General's office. Her name was Jennifer Walsh, and she asked me detailed questions about my interactions with Patricia, the violations she had issued, and the court hearing. I told her everything I could remember. Mr. Coleman, you may have actually helped break this case open, Jennifer said at the end of our call. When Judge Campbell referred the HOA to us, we started looking into their financial records. We noticed some irregularities, but we might not have dug as deep if not for that referral. Patricia Henderson used her position as HOA president to intimidate people into not questioning her decisions. She issued bogus violations to anyone who got too close to discovering what she was doing. You were not her only target, but you were the only one who fought back hard enough to get a judge involved. So all those violations she issued to other people were just to cover up her theft? I asked. Not all of them, but many of them, yes. She created an atmosphere of fear in your neighborhood so that people would not question where the HOA money was going. When they did start asking questions, she would bury them in violation notices until they gave up. The full scope of Patricia's corruption came out over the following weeks. News articles detailed how she had stolen almost $95,000 from the HOA over a 26-month period. She had set up fake vendors and submitted false invoices for maintenance work that was never performed. She had paid herself excessive management fees that were not authorized by the board. She had used HOA credit cards for personal shopping sprees, fancy dinners, and trips to Hawaii and Cabo San Lucas. The other HOA board members claimed they had not known what was going on, but the investigation revealed that at least 2 of them had been suspicious and had tried to ask questions only to be shut down by Patricia. Diane Schwartz, the HOA secretary, eventually admitted that she had noticed irregularities in the financial records, but had been too intimidated by Patricia to say anything. Patricia's attorney tried to work out a plea deal, but the AG's office was not interested. They wanted to make an example of her to send a message to other HOAs in Montana that corruption would not be tolerated. The case went to trial 6 months later, and I was called as a witness. Testifying was nerve-wracking, but Tom Richardson helped me prepare. I told the jury about Patricia's harassment, the bogus violations, her threat to have me jailed. The prosecution used my case to illustrate how Patricia had abused her authority to silence anyone who might expose her crimes. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Patricia showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but I could see her hands shaking. At sentencing 2 months later, Judge Campbell, the same judge who had thrown out the HOA's case against me, sentenced Patricia Henderson to 8 years in state prison and ordered her to pay full restitution of the stolen funds. Judge Campbell did not mince words in her sentencing statement. Ms. Henderson, you abused a position of trust for personal gain. You bullied and harassed your neighbors to cover up your crimes. You used the legal system as a weapon against innocent people. Your actions have damaged your community and undermined public confidence in homeowners associations. I am imposing the maximum sentence allowed by law because I believe you are a danger to any community you might be part of in the future. Patricia was led away in handcuffs, and I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because justice had been served, but sadness because it should never have gotten to this point. If someone had stood up to Patricia earlier, if the HOA board had done proper oversight, if anyone had questioned why she was so aggressive toward anyone who challenged her, maybe all of this could have been prevented. The Ridgeview Estates HOA underwent major reforms after Patricia's conviction. Michael Torres, the new president, implemented transparent financial reporting, requiring monthly statements to be sent to all residents. The board revised the covenant to remove vague language and establish clear procedures for issuing violations, including a requirement that all violations be reviewed by at least 3 board members before being sent to residents. They also hired an independent management company to handle day-to-day operations, removing the concentration of power that had allowed Patricia to operate unchecked. As for me, life gradually returned to normal. I kept my plow blade on my truck and continued helping my neighbors during the winter months. The new HOA board not only did not object, they actually thanked me for it and included snow removal assistance in the community newsletter as an example of good neighboring. Mrs. Chen and Mr. Rodriguez became close friends. We started having regular dinners together, and they introduced me to other neighbors I had not known before. The neighborhood felt like a real community for the first time since I had moved in. I also started dating again, something I had not felt ready for after my divorce. I met a woman named Sarah at a community fundraiser for local schools. She was a teacher at Bozeman High School, and we hit it off immediately. When I told her about the HOA saga, she laughed and said she had read about it in the news. "You are the plow blade guy," she said, grinning. "I remember thinking when I read that story that I would want someone like you as a neighbor." A year after the court hearing, Tom Richardson called me out of the blue. "Jack, I thought you would want to know. The Attorney General's office just announced new regulations for HOAs in Montana. They are calling them the Henderson Reforms, after your case. All HOAs in the state now have to comply with strict financial reporting requirements and oversight procedures. They are also establishing a state ombudsman office where homeowners can report HOA abuse without having to go through expensive legal battles." "That is incredible," I said. "Your case made a real difference, Jack. You stood up to a bully when it would have been easier to just give in. A lot of people are going to benefit from your courage." I did not feel particularly courageous. I had just been trying to keep a plow blade on my truck, but I was glad that something good had come out of the whole terrible experience. 2 years later, Sarah and I got married in a small ceremony in my backyard. Mrs. Chen and Mr. Rodriguez were there, along with most of my neighbors from Ridgeview Estates. Even Sharon Mitchell and Michael Torres came, bringing a gift from the HOA board. It was a plaque that read, "To Jack Coleman, for demonstrating the true meaning of community and standing up for what's right." I hung the plaque in my garage, right next to where I park my truck. Every winter, when I attach my plow blade and head out to clear driveways, I look at that plaque and remember the crazy series of events that started with a simple act of being a good neighbor. The whole experience taught me several important lessons. First, that standing up to bullies is necessary, even when it is scary and expensive. Second, that communities work best when people look out for each other instead of trying to control each other. And third, that sometimes the people who seem the most powerful are actually the most vulnerable, because their power is built on deception and fear rather than genuine respect. Patricia Henderson is currently serving her sentence at the Montana Women's Prison in Billings. I have not thought about her much in the past few years, except occasionally when someone new moves into the neighborhood and asks about the HOA. When they hear the story, they are usually shocked that something like that could happen in a quiet Montana suburb. But it did happen, and it could happen anywhere. HOAs have enormous power over people's homes and lives, and that power can be abused if there are not proper checks and balances in place. I was lucky that I had the resources to fight back, and that I had a good lawyer and a fair judge. Not everyone is that fortunate. These days, I serve on the HOA board myself. Michael Torres asked me to join after his term as president ended, and I figured I owed it to the community to help make sure nothing like Patricia's reign of terror ever happened again. We have boring meetings about landscaping and snow removal contracts, and sometimes we have to issue actual legitimate violations when someone does something that genuinely affects property values or safety. But we do it fairly, transparently, and with the understanding that we are serving the community, not ruling it. My plow blade is still attached to my truck every winter. Sometimes I see new residents looking at it nervously, probably wondering if it violates some rule. I always make a point to introduce myself and tell them they are welcome to call me if they ever need help with snow removal. That is what neighbors are supposed to do. The judge threw out Patricia's case in minutes, but the effects of that brief hearing rippled out far beyond my little corner of Montana. The laws changed. An entire system of HOA governance was reformed, and a community that had been living under the thumb of a petty tyrant learned what it meant to actually govern themselves with fairness and common sense. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had just taken the plow blade off my truck that first day when Patricia demanded it. Would she have left me alone, or would she have just found some other reason to target me? Would her embezzlement have eventually been discovered by someone else, or would she still be stealing from the HOA today? I will never know the answers to those questions, but I am glad I made the choice I did. Standing up to Patricia was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also one of the most important. It reminded me that ordinary people have power too, and that sometimes all it takes to defeat a bully is refusing to be bullied. The snow is falling again as I write this, big fat flakes that are already starting to accumulate on the ground. I can see Mrs. Chen's house from my window, and I know that tomorrow morning I will fire up my truck, attach my plow blade, and clear her driveway just like I always do. And if anyone tries to stop me, well, I've got a court ruling and a bunch of reformed HOA laws that say they cannot. That is the real victory, not the court case itself, but the freedom to be a good neighbor without fear of retaliation from people who abuse authority. Patricia Henderson tried to take that away from me, and in the end, she lost everything while I gained a stronger community and peace of mind. Justice, as it turns out, can be served even in the face of intimidation and threats of jail time. Sometimes it just takes a little courage, a good lawyer, and a judge who is willing to call out abuse when she sees it. My case was decided in minutes, but the impact will last for years to come. And every winter, when I clear those driveways and see the grateful smiles of my neighbors, I am reminded that it was all worth it.